Thanks, Tracy. I did want to, despite my great respect for my colleagues at the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, I do want to point out that it is a very short trip from the chocolate candy to the dental chair. And for many of us, that's a history of trauma. So just point that out. Again, we really appreciate our relationship, not just on this project, but on many projects with Tracy and Mark and Kim, folks at Mental Health and Addiction. I think we hopefully have improved services to both of our communities through those joint relationships. And again, we really treasure and appreciate working with you all. One of the, we all learn in different ways. And, some of us, learn from books, and some of us, learn from sitting in lectures and going to conferences and things like that. There's all sorts of different ways to learn, but I know one of the better ways, at least, that I have really learned about trauma was attending one of these early conferences and listening to someone who had the courage to share their very personal story. And that's not something easy for a lot of us to do, to share things that have been painful in our life and have caused, not just pain to us, but pain to others as well. And so it's my privilege to introduce the keynote speaker this morning, a person who has the courage to share their story with us so that we can all learn from her experience and help all of us to move forward. The person that I'm introducing is Juanita McRoberts, and she is a certified Ohio peer recovery supporter for Daybreak and dedicated to helping youth be in the driver's seat of their mental health journey. In addition, she believes in supporting and improving her community through organizing and activism. Juanita graduated from Wright State University in 2015 with a degree in liberal studies with a social science concentration, as well as 2 minors in African and African American studies, women's studies, and a certificate in African American and gender experience in healthcare. It gives me great pleasure and ask you to help me give her a warm welcome to introduce to you Juanita McRoberts. So, Juanita.
Good morning. As stated in the introduction, I use my lived experience on a daily basis as a peer support specialist, and I do this work with youth at a homeless shelter, Daybreak. And I was once a client at this shelter. Daybreak provides housing and mental health services for ages 10 to 24. The reasons why youth enter our doors vary from family homelessness, relocating, and that it resulted in homelessness, escaping violence, household issues, and/or an alternative to juvenile detention to provide services for youth who may have been diagnosed with mental health. But regardless of the reason, the foundation is relief of trauma. Today, I will be discussing my lived experience, journey, and peer support work. Before beginning, I want to highlight a phrase in the title of my presentation, generational trauma. This means that all the trauma is not my own. It has added weight and heaviness because for decades, my family did not have access to resources like I did. So when I do healing work, I am the priority, but simultaneously, I heal my mother, my father, my ancestors, and our relationships. By introducing different energy and surrounding ourselves with nonviolent forms of communication, and just even having conversations that are centered around processing. Next, I will share a personal poem about my experience with trauma and how it feels. And through my presentation, if I say something that resonates with you, or you would just like to express any sort of gratitude into the space, please feel free to express yourself, whether it's through mm-hmms, or just head nods. And my favorite, if you've been in a session with me, a couple of you probably heard me snap my fingers. That's something that I like to do to just show someone I hear you, I resonate with you, and that is valid. So feel free to do what feels right for you. This poem is entitled, Weight of the Clouds. When the pressures are too much, isolated and not validated, hope feels distant. Happiness is only a memory. That's the weight of the clouds. Attempting to grow stronger daily when I tell no one the internal battle occurring inside. And the foundation of trauma, depression, and anxiety's friendship is to manipulate my imagination, running wild in the fields of self-doubt. Convincing me that neither my recovery or my accomplishments are enough. I can be perfectly fine 1 minute and trigger the next with PTSD flashbacks, or moments of sorrow that occur when I begin to long for deep, meaningful apologies, drowning in rivers of silence and shame instead of reaching out. And the pressure of it all just makes you want to go fetal. That's the weight of the clouds. But not today or tomorrow, trauma. I've dealt with you directly, face to face. And in case you need a reminder, I give you breath when I overanalyze everything. So I'm here to tell you I choose freedom. I am capable of having healthy, long-term relationships. I have forgiven. I am forgiveness. Forgiveness is something I do for myself in my journey. The weight of it all has to disappear. No more flashbacks. These moments, when you resurface, are opportunities for forgiveness and healing. And to deny healing only grants opportunities for suffering. So I will remain open to the freedom I deserve. And if you can relate to this, remember, the bravest thing one can do is to choose self-love and persevere despite what they've been through. Hate is easy. Anger is easy. Jealousy is easy. But to choose yourself over the weight of the clouds time and time again shows strength and examination of self-worth. You are virtuous. Your laugh is what love sounds like. Your smile is what love looks like. Your embrace is what love feels like. You define your worth, your own self, not others. Don't feel guilty. Release the chains of trauma and fly above the clouds. Thank you. Okay, the emotional roller coaster just began, so just, strap in. I definitely want to give trigger warnings to anyone. I will be mentioning any physical abuse. Suicide will be mentioned, and also sexual abuse, okay? So if that is too much, if that will trigger you, please take the time that you need. So now I will be doing the submission that I turned in for this keynote. And And this is just about the journey of choosing freedom. My lived experience exists at the intersection of mental health and trauma. In the early days of my childhood, I can recall brief memories of happiness and harmony. But this did not last long, especially after my parents' divorce when I was 7. My mother could no longer afford to live in our house due to income being drastically cut in half. So the home I knew was gone. And we moved into a tiny apartment that was overcrowded with the unwanted company of manipulation, scars, depression, and anxiety, which led to years of exposure to mental, emotional, and physical abuse. My earliest memory of trauma is when I was 8. My mother became so angry with me about something I had done that she had punched me in the face and left a black eye. I was told to lie and to say it happened at t-ball practice and to laugh it off and walk away. I was unaware that this was the start of an emotional and mental manipulation cycle. I began to believe I was such a bad child that that was the reason for the abuse I endured for years to come. 1 year later, my grandfather, who was my favorite person in the whole entire world, had a stroke. And this caused his brain to resort to infant-like behavior a few days before passing away. This scarred me emotionally to see the one person I viewed as invincible in that state. Years to follow, I would be a victim of sexual abuse from trusted family and friends, in addition to the abuse still occurring already at home. I just wanted to be saved, be free from it all, and I thought that day came when I was 12. I was kicked out of the house because my mom said she wanted her life back. I didn't ask why. I wasn't even concerned about clothes. I just ran outside. I called my best friend at the closest phone I could find. And yes, these were payphones. Her mother dropped me off at my dad's, and I was just so excited. I felt free and safe for the first time I can remember in years. But that all felt like a dream when the next morning I heard cops knocking at my dad's door with the threat of pressing charges for kidnapping. So I was put in the back of a police cruiser to be taken back to my concerned mother's custody. But upon arrival, I found out she had went back to work since her power move successfully played out. After that, my mental health started to truly surface. I tried to get free from the chains of depression and constantly overanalyzing that comes with anxiety through my love for poetry in school, because I knew that was my way out. Most days, these coping skills would be enough to help me push through, but some days were darker than others, especially in my early teenage years. On those days, I would be so exhausted mentally, I attempted suicide several times. Thankfully, I never succeeded, nor gave up. I became resilient and acknowledged that depression and anxiety are liars that fed on my hopelessness and excuses and pain. But the power of healing was and has always been inside of me. I chose freedom. I craved freedom from it all and used work as another coping skill that helped with the financial burden in our home. But that wasn't enough. 4 days after I turned 18, I came home to an eviction notice on the door. And at that moment, I decided to embrace the traumas and triggers that were wanting to surface as an opportunity for healing, release, and forgiveness. This resulted on a personal embark on a journey of healing and independence at daybreak, where many necessary services were provided to help me become self-sufficient and experience the beginning stages of recovery, such as therapy, anger management, groups, budgeting, support in my first apartment, my home, my place, my safety. On my journey of healing and independence, I had to be open and honest about how my past abuse contributed to the diagnosis of anxiety and depression. I learned that instead of using imagination as a playground for anxiety to run wild, I could use that energy and be productive. With that extra energy and passion to be productive, I discovered activism and community organizing. This allowed me to find an empowering way to find my voice and to establish my own value system. Progress continues to happen most days by being aware of how this dual diagnosis could affect me in my future, applying new coping skills like meditation, journaling, and as needed therapy sessions, which I still participate in to maintain recovery. Today, I now provide peer support at daybreak and help youth navigate their mental health journey. I always like to say, peer support found me. It put my pain in perspective for others. Working with youth who have mental health diagnosis and trauma, you often hear people exert their concerns of the lack of decision-making. But truth be told, ages 16 to 25 are the years of bad decision-making for every human. And those are the years that you discover you. And that's called dignity of risk. And it is not something that people with mental health diagnosis or addictions are often given. Instead, we always are metaphorically holding their hand due to being nervous of the outcome and not letting them learn from experience and trusting them. This light bulb occurred at one of my first peer support trainings. They introduced an interactive model of how to ensure you are properly working with your population as a peer support specialist. The person you work with is in the driver's seat. They are the decision makers. You are in the passenger seat, offering advice, insight, comfort, and/or asking questions to help with that process. That helped me learn that recovery is not about me and my fears. It's about them and their strength. And if it ever becomes about me, then I need to move and get out of the driver's seat. I loved this interactive model so much, I decided to take the next step and adapt it for my agency. So some of the duties for peer support specialists in the passenger seat include that offering advice, the insight, the comfort, asking questions, saying, if this looks unfamiliar, I've been here before. I can help. Employment specialist. They are like the GPS. Ideas of the best route to get to their goal through employment or education, but they may have to reroute on the youth's preferences, traffic, or accidents ahead. An example of this is failing a drug test for an employment that you really want. We don't want to stigmatize them. We don't want to hurt them. We want to let them know we're there. The case manager would be the driving instructor, essentially teaching you how to drive and telling you ways to be successful. And lastly would be the therapist, and they are the mechanic, preventing breakdowns and low levels by regularly attending scheduled sessions to replenish yourself. In the event that a breakdown does occur, emergency maintenance and safety planning will occur. And just like first-time drivers, I get to witness great moments of youth I work with, get the hang of it, or make questionable turns where I brace myself and say, whew, that's gonna hurt. But if I grab the steering wheel, I'm not helping them. That will make the expectation going forward that someone will grab the steering wheel because they're not capable enough. And when they see the going gets tough, that's what will happen. So instead, I support them through it. Encouraging words, a reaffirming touch on the shoulder, and providing Kleenex in a healing space. And when they say, metaphorically, Miss Juanita, I think I crashed the car, we go on a strength-based approach. Sift through the pros and cons. And one thing with all my youth, I always ask them, despite the situation, did you grow somehow? Like a garden, it continues to grow in rain or sunshine. The garden embraces the rain and uses it as a part of its growth. One of my favorite quotes is an Arab proverb. It's very simple and it states, sunshine all the time makes a desert. This quote has served as a personal reminder that there are purposes for the ups and downs of life. We can't control all environmental factors, but we can control how we handle the elements. Unfortunately, a mental health diagnosis isn't often the most difficult part of recovery, nor with addiction. The most difficult thing is stigma, and how stigma negatively impacts recovery. Stigma doesn't account for progress in recovery. Instead, it's like little detour signs on the path to recovery. For the youth I work with, it's finding a living wage that they actually enjoy. I hear so often, man, I just want to make some money. I just got to do this, I got to do that. And the idea of them actually being able to enjoy employment is so far out of their mind. Instead of a job that would keep them in the cycle of poverty, or an employer that would even judge them. So I try to give them the tools in their toolbox to develop mental toughness and critical thinking so they can be aware of how stigma can possibly impact them despite the advancement in recovery. This is something I understand from a personal standpoint. As someone who is viewed as high functioning with their mental health diagnosis, meaning I usually have the privilege to be viewed as normal, whatever that means, in most settings. It isn't until I disclose my diagnosis or someone spends a significant period of time with me where my solution-oriented thinking and I become very fixated on surfaces. And you know what happens after most people are aware? Stigma. It subconsciously settles in, and they see symptoms rather than seeing me as a whole. From culture to language, stigma is embedded in the way we discuss mental health, addiction, and its symptoms. Quite frankly, we operate in a system that needs recovery. If someone with a mental health diagnosis or an addiction weighs in with decision-making, it is immediately diminished because they are not seen capable of making sound judgment. But are we doing a good job of including them every step of the way to make an informed choice? Instead of treating the diagnosis or addiction, let's treat the person and their trauma. Make it an inclusive experience that looks at their whole, not their parts. We must understand that recovery is not separate from trauma. The human body wants to recover. We see that at the start of fight or flight mode when it begins to diminish. But what follows is a lot of heavy lifting and healing that comes with recovery. Recovering from a traumatic experience requires that the painful emotions be thoroughly processed. Trauma feelings cannot be repressed or forgotten. Tap into your own personal superpowers or encourage someone and support someone to use their superpowers to recover. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I don't want you all to be tricked and bamboozled. I still had some more. Okay, but this is just, thank you so much. I appreciate that. A journey of what it feels like to experience trauma from the point of view of lived experience. And we definitely probably have some people that can relate to this. I think that everyone has had some traumatic situations. It just varies. Sometimes it's trauma with a capital T, and sometimes it's trauma with a lowercase t. And this one's fairly swift. So that first stage is the circuit breaking. It's the overload of an electrical system, too much energy, too much stimulation, everything's coming at you at once. The circuit breaker activates and shuts down everything. This is like the human nervous system, deleting memories like files. Physical symptoms disappear during this time. It could be back pain, migraines, and when the crisis stops, the physical symptoms and feeling returns. That is that fight or flight mode I was talking about. I can personally relate to this. Anytime I may have a trigger or those flashbacks that I spoke of, emotions become secondary and solutions are first in my mind. I personally relate to this anytime that fight or flight mode is activated. I do not begin to process or honor emotions until I know for certain that these solutions are emotion and it's safe to return and to remove myself. So that feeling, it's almost like a defrost and returning back to the emotions takes you to stage 2. This is the return to feelings. So there's different stages that people do this. First is the trickle effect. Emotions can occur small and steady, usually at a low or medium level. Next would be the roller coaster. Emotions are up, down, all over. They're going through them fast. Third, hit and run feelings. Emotions are experienced intensely. They run away, avoid the situation until it builds and builds and builds, and they blow up. Then run away again. It's a cycle, and one that prevents healing. Lastly is the tsunami. Emotions that occur in huge, overwhelming tidal waves, causing the person to feel like they are going to drown. But the waves die down, and they feel better. This occurs when pain is repressed. For these things to happen and for people to return to feelings, we need to facilitate spaces for healing by having them tell their story, whether it's through talking, walking, writing, drawing. Honor the journey and the emotions. Listen to them. Encourage and invalidate their emotions. For me personally, I fall under the tsunami. Like I had said previously in my submission, I have to go through the solutions first, and then emotions come afterwards. And after that tsunami wave's over, you're like, I'm still here, I survived, I made it. But I know that that's still a part of my recovery journey. Stage 3 is the constructive action. Take action, get involved, make a difference from volunteer, activism, or donating. Don't compare. Whatever is meaningful to you. It doesn't have to be huge. Taking action changes the powerlessness associated with trauma, and it changes it to personal power. Combining feeling and actions that will propel you forward in your journey. I guess that could be like the gas for your car. That might be another part I add to the metaphor. Okay. Next, reintegration. This comes with trauma and the opportunity for growth, turning your pain into purpose. Recovery makes you stronger and wiser, developing that emotional intelligence and even healthy relationships. But before we get to this stage, we have to be mindful that these stages can take years to fully commit and change. Some steps may even need to be repeated. Some boundaries may need to be set to prevent triggers. You have to know your limits. The thing we have to be mindful of is these stages can take fully years, and remember that. Don't compare your journey. Don't put time limits on yourself. Hold yourself accountable to do the work. Thank you. All right, so now question time. If anyone has any questions.
There's a couple of microphones, like sort of in the middle of the room where they were yesterday. We've got lots of time.
Yes.
Those stages you just described there, is that something that you're adapting from someone else's writing or something that you've organized yourself?
I adapted it from a Psychology Today article about, I think it was reliving trauma, but I can make sure I can give it to you or give it to them to put on the website. But that was pretty much it. I added a couple things to it, but it's adapted from Psychology Today. And if you search trauma in the search box, it should be like one of the first 2 to come up.
Cool. The way you worded it, I think my staff will really appreciate, so thank you ahead of time.
Oh, no problem.
As a peer support person,
Yes.
when you re-experience your trauma and helping another client, and you go to debrief, what is most helpful from your support person to help you process that event again?
So thankfully, I have not yet experienced too many triggers in the workplace with the youth, and especially since I've been a client at that agency. It's more empowering in those moments, but when I am triggered and then I go to work, that's when I don't like it. It feels ucky, it feels heavy. But instead of shaming it, I try to reach out to my support, which either is my partner, my loved ones, coworkers. I have some of the most amazing coworkers in the whole entire universe. And my boss. So sometimes I just take time in my space. I have a peer support space, and I'll just do meditation. Or sometimes I will have an honest, genuine moment with the youth I work with, because I don't want them to think I'm like a robot and I'm perfect. And I'm like, hey, y'all want to go to Trader Joe's? Y'all want to go out and take a walk? You want to play Just Dance? And that brings me back. I always try to come back to the present, because I know if it's the anxiousness, it's the future. If it's sadness, it's depression, it's the flashbacks, that's the past.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for sharing your story. I think it's very important for all of us that have lived through trauma to remember those chains will set us free.
Yes.
And I've come to realize in my life that those chains, those scars, are just a part of my battle scar. It didn't define me. It didn't hold me back. It made me stronger. So today, like you, I am a survivor.
Yes.
And I will fight to my death for what is right. Thank you.
I'm so proud of you.
I am proud of you too.
Thank you. Okay.
Hi. So mine's a mixture of a question and a statement.
Okay.
So first, as you were talking about advocating, I thought about when I was in elementary school, I had a trauma and I didn't have support. And so now I'm a school-based therapist, so that's probably why. But also,
I love that.
thinking about writing a letter to like the superintendent at my elementary school saying, hey, you know, these kids might want some support. So my question is, do you ever get discouraged whenever you're advocating for change and nothing happens?
Yes, but I understand that those are barriers put in place by the relations of power. Activism and community organizing and being a part of protests and things of that nature made me realize that fighting the good fight is such hard work. So whenever that happens, you figure out another way to get that because those kids need that resource. And you know that from personal experience. So taking that no is not sufficient enough. So if you have to email them every month, hey, just a reminder, you need to do this, I'm more than willing to send you a link, a resource. If you're, able to maybe find some coworkers that are willing to do some resources there as well, kind of thinking outside of the traditional form to make sure that those youth have those resources, but not overextending yourself. So having those boundaries, because you got to make sure that you're well to provide wellness.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is it okay if I make a comment? to
Yes,
one
of
the,
course.
one of the things you said?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things you said was about high-functioning clients being able to make more decisions. So a while back in April, I think it was April 20th, I had went to a Good Life training up at Pickaway County Board of DD with some other Good Life trainers, and we had we were talking about what would be the effect if we were to give clients with disabilities who are high functioning more options to make changes to their staff about giving them the choice to make changes to their staff if they were high functioning. And we had all agreed that that would be a good idea because then they would be able to say, well, we don't like this is what you're doing and you're doing this wrong. So I think that'd be a great idea if the clients had more of a say about what services they are getting. So I think clients should have a say of what services they're getting.
I agree with you 100%.
So
Peer support.
I just wanted to say that was a good compliment you threw out there, and you do a good job speaking.
Oh, well, thank you.
So-
I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. But I definitely agree. And I enjoyed your presentation so much yesterday. And thank you for warning me about the elevator earlier today. But I agree wholeheartedly. If I'm having a meeting with my youth, I'm like, they need to be here. I'm not meeting about them without them being here. They need to know that we care. They need to know that they have these wraparound services, and they need to be able to decide what can help benefit them. So thank you so much. Okay. Yes.
I just wanted to say, I like the part when you said about driving, when you said let them drive and we be the passengers. Sometimes we like to just drive them straight into everything perfect and everything,
Yeah.
and that just kind of let us know to sit back and kind of let them guide and kind of be there for them. So I really like that part that you open up about that, so we can kind of sit back and kind of help them instead of always taking over.
Yes.
So I really do appreciate you being a peer, because I used to be a psychosocial activity facilitator now, but I really love that position, and I still try to be peer to them as being psychosocial activity facilitators. So I do appreciate you being a peer and open up to youth because they need that. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the work that you do. I appreciate it. Anyone else? Okay.
So, Quinita, I want to, we do an awful lot of talking about how, in the principles of trauma-informed care, trust and transparency and empowerment, voice, and choice. And I so appreciate Quinita because Quinita let me have it. She let me have it, and so do you feel comfortable sharing about how in your love and patience you let me have it?
Yes, of course.
Because I appreciate what she said about nothing about him without him, right? And so we marched forward. And Quinita called me like a couple days beforehand and said, do you mind if I pick my own topic for my keynote? I said, well, of course, because we had already publicized what her keynote was going to be and the title of it. So can you share a little bit about what you're helping me to understand? Because, you know, after spending 30-some years in social services, like I can talk a lot about how important it is to engage the people that we serve more actively, right? And then no sooner than that, then I'm determining what the title of your keynote is going to be. So can you talk about our exchange, loving exchange?
It was. Well, number one, I'm so proud of Kim because I am a person that's very assertive. My boyfriend's here, he can probably tell you about that. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. But I learned that through finding my voice, like I said, through activism, through community organizing. And although I love peer support, it's hard work. It's such hard work. And like I said, it's that stigma. So combining, because peer support is rooted through activism, right? So anytime I have that hat on, I make sure that I'm also using that activism lens. So I was, number one, so honored to be selected to be the second day keynote. However, you know, like I said, anxiety, I want to be informed, I want to know what's going on, you know. I didn't really see as much information. I checked in a little bit here and there. And then I had, you know, requested to see a link about the programming. And I saw, as you all have on your pamphlets for today, that a title was already selected. Now, that was not the jargon I had selected to use, so I did send an email. And I also sent a list of my concerns. But I also was honored or attempted to honor the work that Kim was doing and other people to facilitate the space for 500 people. So I know that that's hard work because event planning is so stressful and you have to think about so many other things. But it came to light that there was no one with really lived experience in the planning to think about that stuff for people with lived experience. So myself, Kim, and one of the greatest advocates, Sharon Fitzpatrick, had a real honest heart-to-heart conversation about how that was affecting, playing into things. And I was brazen and assertive in it, not for me, not to stroke my ego, but for future people in this. And that has been my journey in peer support thus far. I'm the first peer support specialist at Daybreak. It bothers me because I know that when I was a client, I was kind of like the person they use for videos, the winning child and all of those things. I don't want to make that a stigma for the next person. So holding people accountable is out of love and out of my peer support. So does that help? Does that give? Yeah, that's it. Did I say it all, Kim? I sent an email.
Quinita, I can't tell you what you said wrong or right.
Okay. I'm trying to remember it all. But no, I think it was handled, I know it was handled very well. And one of the hardest things you can do, in this field, when you have years and skin in the game, is tell yourself, wow, I dropped the ball on that one. And Kim did it so gracefully and wonderfully, and he didn't make it about himself. And he's been bending himself and learning and growing, and even said something so wonderful as I resonate with, that the job's not done until I work myself out of this job. So I loved that. I love those words. And that's how I also feel about peer support or activism. These are not jobs that you want to have forever. If so, you're playing into the system of it all. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Are there any other questions for Quinita? So I have another question.
Okay.
So this whole second day, as you heard the directors and Dr. Hurst talk about, is really focused on how as professionals, and that includes everybody in this room, right? Mm-hmm. Whoever people are here, I know there's a couple of kids who came with parents, like they're professionals too. What's the one thing that's important for professionals, however they define themselves, to know and understand how to take care of themselves?
Well, I went to a wonderful training yesterday. It was the second training. It was about unpacking your bags, and also talked about secondhand trauma and how real that is. And if whoever was in that session with me, you heard me talk a lot also. So self-care is one of my favorite topics. And I spoke up in that space and said, we need to start using our sick days, not even just for physical sickness, but for mental health days. You need to do that. And you need to do it in a way that is preventative and not just when it occurs. And we also need to know that just because you are the person, you are the resource, you are the well of knowledge, does not mean that you can't go to someone else. Whether it's therapeutic, whether it's just a circle, whether it's just a community. In order to ensure that you're doing the best work that you can, you have to make sure that you're being lifted up as well. And that you have those resources to make sure they are holding you accountable to take care of yourself. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, little.
No, it's the light. It's not you. It's the light.
The lights are amazing.
My question is, you said that you had some generational issues. I wanted to know if you were willing to speak about maybe how you had to kind of retrain your family, if they were supportive. Did you have any pushback? And do you think if you have children or not, that you would make changes with them also?
Yes. Okay. That's a real question. Okay. All right. Okay. So, as you all know, in this brief period of time already, I'm a very assertive person. So when I say generational trauma and I mention my ancestors, I am talking about slavery, the big S word, and what that did for centuries and how that turned into displacement, poverty, socioeconomic disparities, and all of those things in that nature that aided to the traumas that my family and the generations face now. So personal, family-wise, I think about my mother and I think about my father. My mother, I am pretty sure that she definitely struggles with bipolar. A diagnosis, she's never, of my awareness, been diagnosed, but I see her cycle very often. in a way that was the only thing that makes sense. Me and my mother's relationship is so much better than what it was before. I had to take myself out of the hurt to see her. My mother is a thinking person, not a feeling person. And a lot of times, people told me stories when my mom did become pregnant. She was worried about her career and what that would do. And then also, she was married. Her plan and her vision was to have her career and to have a joint family. And when that left, that hurt her. That hurt her very badly, in addition to all the other trauma she endured. I saw on my grandmother's deathbed, when my grandmother died of cancer, she still didn't want my mom to talk to her or touch her. Oh, the pain that had to be to, even on your mother's deathbed. So I have so much love for understanding that that's where that came from. And I still don't know the roots of it, only she does. I can have a good idea, but it wouldn't be my place to state that. So we try and we work through that. We have times that we communicate really well and laughing and all of that, but sometimes it's difficult. And sometimes, like I said in that poem, I have moments that creep up because my mother has never given me a heartfelt apology, but I don't need that to move forward. And I've already chosen to forgive her. My father, he also has his own issues of, I would like to say, I guess, just general anxieties from his childhood. And he has a lot of self-doubt. My dad is one of the most amazing people I know with a work-driven approach. He's worked in the restaurant business for 25 years, from bartending to cooking to serving, being a manager once, and he still doesn't think he's good enough to take risks and chances, whether it's being a manager or opening his own place. He just likes to have predictability. And whenever discomfort surfaces, his vices are alcohol. He gambles on a daily basis, and I've had hard conversations with him about my concerns with that. And lastly, I also just recently discovered, I think within the last 2 years, that both of my parents have anxiety. And it happened through those nonviolent communications. And when I tell you in the last 2 years, that's inclusive of both of them, but my dad, I just found that out on Easter, because we had a conversation and he got out the car and I was trying to talk to him. And he said, I didn't know you had anxiety. I have anxiety. I said, I didn't know you had anxiety. And yeah, two anxious people trying to have a conversation is kind of weird, So needless to say, we had a delicious dinner, and that's one of the other ways that I heal with my father. Sunday dinners and cooking. That's our love language. It's so wonderful. And my mom was even able to come to that. So it's very nice. And as far as pressing forward for my future children, one day, that would be nice. It scares me to think of my uterus being taken over at this point in time. But I know that the work that I'm doing now is for them. And I'm learning so much. I'm trying to do as much healing work as I can so that they can come into healthy relationships and not have to work as hard for them. That's pretty much it. I hope I answered that question. I know it was lengthy. Okay. Anyone else?
And when you do, how do you
I did miss the first part.
when working with children, do you also work with parents with the kids?
Very, very small amounts of times, because if I work with the minors, it's usually after hours, because I change my work schedule, so it's when the youth come out almost of their rooms and they think everyone's gone. So if I do see a parent, it is when they're usually dropping the youth off. And so sometimes I have to help ease their concerns about it, and just talking to them and kind of taking away some of the shame that they may feel. And sometimes it's a lot of grandparents as well. But I haven't really had any hard conversations with parents because the majority of the population I work with is that 18 to 24 year age.
Because I work with kids, and I just wondered, because sometimes I can't get the parents kind of to come on board with helping and understanding, and the same thing with the grandparents, or even harder, of understanding that, you know, their grandkids have been through a lot. So I just was wondering kind of how you would help to kind of bring them to be able to do that.
Well, here's the first thing. My immediate thought is your aha moment isn't for them. It's for the kids. Now, that doesn't make your job any easier, I get it. But number two, just continue to plant those seeds and just water them and nourish them and just show them love. And, you know, just let them know that they can be a part of this change and this wonderful resource to help facilitate growth for them. So incorporating them almost in a way that it seems like they can kind of have some help with the change, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, because you're working with a lot of like years of stubbornness and hard-headedness if you're working with parents and grandparents, so that would just, you know, be too much. So just try and plant those seeds, but focus on the youth.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, bright lights, don't know if I see anyone else. Okay. Is that it? All right. Going once, going twice. So, no, I'm just kidding. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Kim.